Westminster, nestled in the Connecticut River Valley in between Putney to the south and Rockingham to the north. To the east, the Connecticut River flows, and to the west, a line of hills beyond which the town of Brookline lies. It has two distinct terrains, the more mountainous rocky west and the flatter east. It was in this land where almost 300 years ago the town of New Taunton was charted. In the 1730s, New England colonies had a demand to expand due to an influx of settlers coming from the Old World. The Massachusetts Bay Colony charted north into modern-day Vermont, and on November 19, 1735, Westminster was charted. It was charted as Township No. 1, and the claims were given to citizens of Taunton, Norton, and Easton for their service in recent wars. The town of Taunton was heavily represented, with meetings for Township No. 1 being held in Taunton. The name was soon changed to New Taunton. The first settlers came to New Taunton in 1739. These were Richard Ellis and his son, Reuben. He, not being one of the original proprietors, bought shares and built a house south of the modern Westminster village. In 1740, New Hampshire gained independence from Massachusetts, and a border dispute over the northern border was settled in New Hampshire's favor, and New Taunton was no longer part of Massachusetts. After New Hampshire claimed New Taunton, the new settlers gave up their project, and New Taunton was abandoned. Early in New Taunton's history, it faced problems of attracting new settlers and keeping its population. This was mainly because of Indian scares in neighboring Fort Dummer and Walpole. Captain Josiah Williard, commander of Fort Dummer, located in modern Brattleboro, had acquired 12 shares in the desolate New Taunton for his role in Greylock's War. He died in 1750, but his son Josiah, who himself was commander of the garrison at Ashfalt, now Keene, inherited the shares. In 1751, a couple of settlers ventured to New Taunton after a peace treaty had hostile Indian actions die down. Westminster was in the middle of conflict between New Hampshire and New York. The New Hampshire Charters stated that the colony's borders extended west until it met those of other governments. New York claimed that its borders went to the Connecticut River. This put the two colonies in direct competition over Vermont land. In November 1752, New Hampshire re-granted New Taunton and renamed it Westminster. In 1753, war with the French and Indians broke out, and many Westminster families crossed to Walpole. After the French and Indian Wars, many of the settlers moved back, and new settlers came. Around the 1760s, the village occupied the Westminster Flats. A road was built called the King's Highway. It was built 10 rods wide for militia training. This is the modern-day Route 5 from Westminster Station down into the village. After the war, a number of soldiers from Fort No. 4 moved to Westminster. The most important of these soldiers was Isaiah Wright. He later would become the leader of the Westminster Militia. In 1766, New York ordered all New Hampshire grant holders to acquire confirmatory New York patents with new fees, which were bigger than New Hampshire's. In 1768, New York launched a charter campaign in Vermont, and this brought direct physical conflict with the New Hampshire and New York guarantees. These events led to the rise of the Green Mountain Boys. In Westminster, Isaiah Wright established his militia. His militia was for Whigs only, a Whig being a person who was pro-independence. In the 1760s, Westminster was part of Albany County, but because of bad roads and a large distance from New York, Vermont settlers, being burdened by this, had the New York legislature make a new county of Cumberland County. By 1770, Westminster had attracted many settlers and became the most populated town in Cumberland County, and became the county head soon after. Many mills were built in Westminster around this time, with the Saxons River being the most valuable. Still, the majority of the population was farmers, and the land was very rural. Westminster's revolutionary sentiment was being sowed in the town by a Whig militia who were upset at the king's taxes. In October 1774, the first Westminster Convention was held, and it was the first in Vermont to oppose pressure from Great Britain. They not yet were revolutionary, but they argued for the rights of Britain's subjects. Other conventions were held, and by the third, the Whigs feared an embargo against Cumberland. They distrusted their government on all levels. There are two buildings which play a very important part in Westminster's history in 1775. These are the Tory Tavern and the Courthouse. The Tory Tavern was a pro-British pub on the current-day Route 5. The Courthouse was a meeting house for Cumberland County and has a very big role to play in events that come later this year. Court was to meet on March 13, 1775, but on March 10th, 40 men from Rockingham traveled to Chester to dissuade Colonel Shadler from attending court. Shadler said he must go to a murder case, and when he came back, he would make a ruling that was suitable to the people. He then sent word to his fellow officials in Brattleboro, who promptly gathered a loyalist militia. Somehow, the Whigs found out about this posse. On Monday, the posse came to Westminster with clubs and rifles. The Whigs went to Westminster and met up at Azariah Wright's house. They gathered clubs and went to the courthouse. Within a half an hour, the posse came to the courthouse and demanded the Whigs left the building. The Whigs refused. The posse went down to the Tory Tavern where they consumed 4 gallons of rum while consulting. At the courthouse, the Whigs chose a committee and drafted articles to stand for, and then voted on them. Around midnight, after many of the Whigs had left to find a place to sleep, a sentry at the courthouse saw men with guns. He gave the alarm, and the Whigs defended the front. The posse marched up, and the sheriff yelled, "Take aim! Fire!" 3 shots rang out. The balls just hit the door, and the sheriff yelled, "Fire, goddamn you! Fire! Send them to hell!" Azariah Wright's brother-in-law fought back through the doorway, shouting, "Don't run, boys! Don't run! We'll go out the same way we came in!" He ran through the doorway, knocking down many men of his club and taking many saber cuts. The posse now occupied the courthouse and threw prisoners into the cells. Among these was William French, who was shot through the head and died several hours later. A replica of William French's grave is still in the old cemetery, along with a monument to him put up by the state. The Whigs who got away convened at Azariah Wright's house. The next morning, militias from surrounding towns showed up, including Westminster's own. They marched to the courthouse and took it back without any violence, due to the numerical advantage that the militia had over the posse. The militia imprisoned every New York official they came across, and the events of this day, March 13th, would go down in history as the Westminster Massacre. As the American Revolution started, Westminster men fought against the British on all types of battlefields. On January 15, 1777, the convention met in Westminster once more. The representatives believed that Vermont should be an independent state, and so it was there at Westminster Courthouse that Vermont declared independence as New Connecticut. The independent country of New Connecticut was renamed into Vermont. In 1780, the Vermont legislature met in Westminster, but they had an issue. There was no printing press in the entire state. They got a printing press from New Hampshire, and Westminster became the first town with a printing press in the state. The press printed Vermont's first paper money, as well as its first newspaper in the entire state. Westminster played a pivotal role in the history of Vermont. It was the first town to be chartered in Vermont. It was home of the first meeting to oppose British law. It was the first bloodshed act of the American Revolution, which was the massacre. It was where Vermont declared independence, and where its first printing press called home, where the new republic's first money was printed, and its newspaper. Westminster is home to many other accomplishments, but its achievements in the 18th century is why this little town, nestled in the Connecticut River Valley, shows its importance to our history.